2020, 2022. Ryan, I will just ask you before we get to the formal agenda to do your Zoom explanation, if you will.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Coastal Resources Management Council virtual semi-monthly meeting of March 8th, 2022, conducted in accordance with Executive Order 22-01. If you're having problems with the computer audio, use the call-in numbers for this meeting. The call-in numbers listed below. The numbers and password will be listed in the chat box after this recording. A note to meeting participants and attendees, please be advised this is an online meeting, including all audio, video, names and comments are visible in the chat are being recorded. All members of the public who wish to comment during these proceedings must correctly identify themselves before proceeding. Council members, applicants, and CRMC staff, please turn your video on. Do not use phone and computer audio at the same time. Raise your hand or use the raise hand button to be recognized by the chair. Identify yourself by first and last name. Members of the public, please keep your video off. Mute your microphone when not speaking. Use the raised hand function to be recognized by the chair. Wait to be recognized by the chair and unmuted by the moderator to speak. Identify yourself by first and last name. For those calling in, please press *9 to use the raise hand function. When recognized, identify yourself by first and last name. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. All right, I would ask that our record reflect council members and staff members that are present. I believe everyone's visible on the screen and identifiable by name. So I'd ask that our record reflect those in attendance. First matter on our agenda would be approval of the minutes of the previous meeting, that being Tuesday, January 25, 2022. I know they've been disseminated. I'd ask for a motion to approve them, or if it's in a correct posture, if any additions or corrections need to be made.
Reynolds makes a motion to approve the minutes.
The motion's been made by Ms. Reynolds. Is there a second?
Second, Gagnon.
Mr. Gagnon seconds it. Motion made and seconded to accept the minutes as presented. I will do a roll call for acceptance of the minutes. Ms. McGovern?
Present.
We're on a motion to approve the minutes. I need a yes or a no.
Oh, yes, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. I jumped ahead on the attendance and let the record reflect. Thank you, Lindsay. Ms. Montanaro?
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds?
Yes.
Mr. Gagnon?
Yes.
Mr. Gomez?
Yes.
And I too, Raymond Coyer, vote aye. So the minutes as presented are accepted. Subcommittee reports.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The Council's Planning and Procedures Subcommittee is scheduled to meet next Tuesday, the 15th of March at 9 a.m. via Zoom meeting. And an agenda packet will be forwarded to the subcommittee members before the end of this week, and meeting notice posted as well. We are able to hold this meeting via Zoom in accordance with Executive Order 22-20, which does not expire until March the 19th. That's the end of the subcommittee report, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Mr. Boyd. Any questions of Jim from any of the council members? Okay, thank you. Staff reports. Jeff.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. First off, I want to introduce Kevin Sloan. He is our newest coastal policy analyst. We had interviewed for this position a couple of months ago, had over 60 applicants, and Kevin easily rose to the top of that list when we selected candidates to interview. So I wanted to introduce them all to you tonight. There is nothing on the agenda, your agenda tonight, where Kevin will have to participate or whatnot, but I just thought it important that we introduce him to you. So welcome, Kevin. A couple other matters, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
House Commission on Shoreline Lateral Access has met as recently as last week. There'll be one more meeting in a couple of weeks. And we came to consensus on two significant issues that the commission will probably use as a basis for potential legislation to be introduced this session. And that is a recognition of when walking along the shore that one should see the rack line as a definable feature on the shore at which folks can walk along the shore and not be trespassing, quote unquote, on private property. The other part of that commission's work was to identify where above, meaning landward of the rack line, can folks walk, especially at high tide. And we spent a decent amount of time debating what that area should be, could be in terms of how many feet landward. And we've landed on, by consensus, actually, by all but one of the members agreed that 10 feet above the rack line should be that area that folks can walk laterally along the shore without worrying of trespassing on private property. So that was a significant move on that commission's part, and we look forward to seeing some legislation that recognizes that this session.
Jeff, it's Ray. 1 second again. Can you just please repeat again for me the line, what you call the rack line? Could you just
Sure.
explain it one more time for me?
Sure. At high tide, coupled with wind and wave run up, you will notice there's a line of seaweed or detritus that washes up on the shore. And as the high tide recedes to low tide, it leaves its mark on the shore of where that seaweed line is. So a rack line could be called a seaweed line. It could be called a swash line. It has a couple of different names that it goes by, but generally speaking, it's that line of, for lack of a better word, detritus that's left behind at high tide, coupled with wind and wave run up. And that is a definable and easily found line in the sand, if you will, that the public can see when walking on the shore. Previous to that, we have the Ibison case back in the 1980s that established where the public-private line was, and that was mean high water. And it's mean high water is never, you can never see where mean high water is when you're walking on the shore because it's not a line, it's a tidal datum. And it's tidal datum that is the elevation of the tides, and it's the elevation of the mean high tide that gets shot onto the profile of the land, of the shore in this case. And we have shown through many of the commission's meetings that that mean high water mark, that elevation mark that's shot onto the shore, is underwater at least 2/3 of the time during the tide. So at many tides, you are walking, if you're walking below mean high water, you're walking in wet water. You're getting your feet wet. So it was important for this commission to understand that at any tide, folks should be able to walk along the shore without getting their feet wet. And where do you find that area to walk? Well, the first thing you had to do is figure out where is the better definition of the public-private property line, if you will, because mean high water is not it. And we settled on that rack line, the seaweed line, if you will, that everyone can understand that that is a better definition of where the maximum tides could be that folks can see, and then where landward of that line can they walk along the shore at any particular tide. And that's when we landed on 10 feet for that.
So it's 10 feet inward from that definitive line, for lack of a better term. The definitive
That's
line.
correct. That is
Okay.
correct.
All right, thank you for that explanation.
Sure. The other thing, a couple other things I wanted to mention. We've probably talked in the past, and I know we've talked about this many years ago. The Army Corps of Engineers is responsible for dredging the Providence River shipping channel that comes up into the Port of Providence, brings all of our commerce into the state in various types of forms and activities. That channel is congressionally authorized to be 40 feet, but as you can imagine, over time, areas of it silt into less than 40 feet. The Army Corps is the federal agency responsible for maintaining that depth. Well, several years ago, with the regular Corps studies have found that there were areas that needed to be dredged, and the Corps started its work on surveying just exactly how many areas and what yardage and the extent to which the dredging needs to occur. As part of that project, they enter into agreements with state agencies, and in Rhode Island, CRMC is that state agency that would be considered to be a local sponsor to the project to help with the design and movement and coordination that whatever is needed for that project to move forward. One of the things that you might expect in dredging the sediment up in the port area is that it's contaminated because of primarily the heavy metals that existed at the turn of the last century that are still present in some of the sediments. So to get rid of that material, it's very costly to dispose of it upland or offshore in an offshore disposal site for a number of reasons. So the Army Corps has employed, at our insistence actually, what's called CAD cells. I think we've mentioned this to you in this past, where we have dug holes underneath the channel where to well below 40 feet, in this case, somewhere in the vicinity of 90 to 100 feet deep, where these materials that are contaminated with heavy metals can be deposited, and the project can use those areas to put that material in. For this next round of dredging, the Corps would have to build new CAD cells, and that's fine. We're in agreement with that because once the Corps project is completed, the CAD cells that were done for the Providence River Dredge project can be turned over to the state, and the remaining capacity can be managed by the state of Rhode Island for other dredge material disposal projects that we can charge a per cubic yard fee for. We've had this in place for the past 20 years, and we would do it again for this particular project. So the Army Corps, we met with them back in the summer of last year, and we had an agreement of what the cost share for digging those CAD cells would be, because that's what the local sponsor would be on the hook for, a percentage share of digging the CAD cells. And we put in our capital budget what that number would be. And we have gone, and the governor has recommended that the state cost share at the appropriate level, what we asked them to do. And we met with the Corps just recently and found that that number has actually doubled, which of course would need to necessitate either changing our capital request to through the state budget office or finding other ways for the Corps to dispose of this. So I just wanted to alert you that we're having issues with the Army Corps in this particular project because of that cost share has doubled. And I'll just let you know, it's doubled from 16 million to 32 million. So it's not an insignificant number. The other part of that project is it's delayed. It should have been started right about now or this coming fall. It probably won't be started till 25 or 26, 2025 or 2026. I will keep you up to date on that project as it moves forward. However, right now it's more of an issue of making sure the Army Corps can justify this additional expense to the state of Rhode Island, if it can at all. Quickly, we have been working on what we call the base samp, which we've mentioned to you in the past, but in particular, one specific element of the base samp, and that's working on our aquaculture processes. We have, as you know, had aquaculture as one of our regulated activities for many years. In fact, in 1996, the legislature tapped the CRMC as the primary agency for aquaculture in coordination with a lot of the programs at DEM and some with the Department of Health. We have had a couple of issues in the Sakonnet River that have brought to fore some notification issues and ways to improve our notification process. And over the course of the fall and winter, we have met with a number of stakeholders several times and found ways to improve our notification process. A lot of those are administrative. We're making those changes now. And just to give you one example, any aquaculture project that will be proposed in anywhere is going to have to notify any properties that fall within 1,000-foot perimeter of their proposed aquaculture farm. So if you have an aquaculture farm in the water, you take a 1,000-foot perimeter all around it, and where it intersects land and the parcels within that, all those property owners would have to be notified. If another farm falls within that 1,000-foot area, those other farms would obviously have to be notified too. So we just went and improved our notification processes for aquaculture as well. And then again, within that 1,000-foot radius off of a proposed farm, we are requiring applicants to generate a lot more information that happens in that area. so that an aquaculture application could be far more complete very early on in the process for folks to understand what is being proposed and what potential impacts that proposed farm might have. So a lot of those changes are administrative. You'll start to see application packages come in front of you that have far more information than they did in the past. And it was all because of this input from a number of stakeholders that we've been meeting with over the past several months. So a very successful project in engaging the public and the communities on that. And then lastly, I just want to mention that this weekend is the Rhode Island Saltwater Anglers Saltwater Fishing Show. We traditionally have a booth in it, and since it was canceled the last year, if not two, because of COVID, it's up and running again in in the last 2 years. CRMC has a booth at the Saltwater Angler Show. So if you're interested in fishing and you want to get out of the house and see what's going on in the world of saltwater angling with boats, as well as rod and reel, come on down. CRMC will have a booth, and I'll give a shout out to our Laura Dwyer, who's coordinating that on our behalf. That's it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. Any questions of Jeff? And
Questions?
Don, you've got your hand up.
Yes, on the aquaculture 1,000-foot perimeter, how do you measure that? Is it, I mean, some of the farms are rectangular, some have a curvature to them, and then they have lanes, or you might have a line, and it might be 20 feet to the edge of the so-called farm. So I'm just curious on how you measure the 1,000 feet.
Sure. No, that's a great question, Mr. Gomez. The Base Samp partnership consists of CRMC as well as the University of Rhode Island, and then as many stakeholders as we brought into it, and primarily the communities, but a lot of individuals as well. But the University of Rhode Island's part in this project is in large part policy generating and a lot of coordination, but they also have expertise on the technology side. And they brought in their environmental data center to this project. And the person in charge of that particular part of the project has developed a GIS mapping system where you can go online and put your coordinates of your farm in there, lat lawn, and this system will automatically generate that 1,000-foot perimeter around the entirety of your farm, overlay it with land that it intersects. And he's also introduced the parcel data from every coastal town in the state, so that you as a potential aquaculture farmer can get the parcel data that's within 1,000 feet of your proposed farm, print off the list of property owners and get the addresses for all those properties so that they can all be notified. So to answer your question, the University of Rhode Island helped us develop an online program to make it easy for anybody to put a 1,000-foot perimeter around their proposed farm and see what the potential impacts could be.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Mr. Willis? All right, seeing none, we will go to our agenda items. And first matter is Coastal Habitat Restoration Trust Fund applications before the council for review and decision. They're listed in the agenda. I'm not going to specifically enumerate them right now because I think in the presentation they will be spoken about and enumerated. Jeff, who's doing this? Is Caitlin?
So actually, Mr. Chair, yes, we have Leah Feldman, our coastal policy analyst, and our old friend Caitlin Chafee, now of the Narragansett Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve over at DEM, who co-chair the Habitat Restoration team. So I'll leave it up to them to tag team the presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to present the Coastal and Estuarine Habitat Restoration Trust Fund's Technical Advisory Committee recommendations to the council. And I think I'll go ahead and give a brief explanation of the fund for those who may not be familiar, and just summarize the projects. As Director Willis said, Leah Feldman and I serve as co-chairs for the Technical Advisory Committee that develops these recommendations. And then I'm happy to answer any questions about the proposals. All of the full proposals that were submitted for funding are included in your agenda packet. So all of those materials are there. But just to give a brief background, this is a fund, it's the 19th year of administering this Coastal and Estuarine Habitat Restoration Trust Fund. Each year, the funding is allocated from the state's oil spill prevention and response fund. So there's a chunk of $250,000 that's allocated annually to habitat restoration projects. To date, the fund has provided $3.9 million for over 140 projects, which have leveraged over $30 million in matching funds. So these are projects that are also bringing in federal, local funds in addition to these state funds. And in total, these projects have restored over 300 acres of coastal and estuarine habitat, which is a significant impact considering a modest investment. And for those who aren't familiar, habitat, when we say coastal and estuarine habitats, we just mean those natural areas within our coastal zone and throughout the Narragansett Bay estuary that support fish and wildlife. But they're also vital to the health and productivity of our communities. They provide countless what we call ecosystem services. So they do things like absorb pollutants, protect shorelines from storm events. They mitigate flooding, and they support sectors of our economy, such as recreation, tourism, and fisheries, of course. Healthy habitats mean a more resilient Rhode Island. When we talk about habitat restoration, we really just are talking about projects that seek to repair any damage that's been done to these natural areas by human activity. So typical examples include things like removing man-made dams that impede upstream passage of anadromous fish or fish that move upstream to spawn. So removing those barriers to fish migration. Or it could be something like restoring the hydrology of a salt marsh, a coastal wetland, so that we can increase tidal exchange or help the marsh deal with rising sea levels. These are the typical kinds of projects that we'll see funded through this fund. The fund itself has always been administered by CRMC, that's established through legislation, and every year funding recommendations are made to the council by a technical advisory committee, which again is co-chaired now by myself and Leah. So the Research Reserve and CRMC kind of play a partnership role in running the technical advisory committee. The committee members are habitat restoration practitioners and experts from state, federal, and non-governmental or partner organizations. For this most recent round, the committee met on February 23rd to develop its funding recommendations for fiscal year 2022. And we are recommending to the council funding for 5 projects. 2 projects are dealing with restoring anadromous fish passage. So either removing barriers to anadromous fish passage or altering or constructing structures like fish ladders that will assist fish traveling upstream. One of the projects is dealing with salt marsh restoration, actually in multiple locations throughout the state. So restoring tidal hydrology to salt marshes. We have a riverine stream bank project, which is located on the Woonasquatucket River in Providence. And then there's more of a coastal dune and buffer restoration project in Middletown at the Norman Bird Sanctuary. So again, included in your agenda packets are descriptions of these projects. There's a map that shows the geographic distribution of all of these projects. I'm happy to go through the list if you'd like me to, with all the recommended funding amounts. Those are laid out in the memo at the beginning of your agenda packet. For the most part, we're recommending full funding of all of the requests, except for 2 of the projects for which we're recommending partial funding. So I'm happy to give more detail on the projects or answer any questions that folks might have.
Mr. Gomez, I
Caitlin?
see you have a question.
Caitlin, as I've said in past years, I think you guys did a very, very good job, and I'm in favor of the conclusions you came to relative to the funding. But I do have a couple of questions on my favorite subject, which is Tiverton and Little Compton. And there were a couple of things that I know that's a small part of it, but It's a place I visit often. What's the multiflora rose? I think this is the first time I've heard that was a problem. What is that compared to the Rosa rugosa or something, and why do we want to get rid of it?
Multiflora rose is just a different species of rose that is also invasive. It's not quite as aggressive as Rosa rugosa is on the shoreline, but it can definitely take over an area. So a typical activity would be removing that invasive plant, and then there's lots of native alternatives, Rosa virginiana. There's different kinds of beach roses that are native that would be replanted in its place. And the difference is they don't create those dense monocultures and crowd out native plants that are better food sources for native fish native wildlife, birds and animals.
We don't do that with the Rosa rugosa though, do we?
Yeah, Rosa rugosa is a tricky one. So we do consider that invasive because it's a non-native plant that kind of creates those monocultures. But oftentimes, because of where it grows in these sensitive beach or dune areas, removing it can be very disruptive and cause severe erosion. So we recognize that, and sometimes it's been planted intentionally for years for just that purpose.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
you know, a lot of times in beach areas where folks are trying to, you know, hold the shoreline in place or, you know, guide pedestrians to a certain area and keep them out of another area. I think even the CRMC recognizes that that's an acceptable use. Yeah.
I thought I remembered that it was one of the accepted plants for some of this stuff in, you know, years past anyway. And not to belabor it, I came across the word and I guess I need to have my, I got to learn something new every day. So what's a runnel?
Oh, yeah. Well, no, I'd love to talk about runnels. So Save the Bay, this is a technique that Save the Bay has pioneered in Rhode Island. And really, it's just shallow drainage. It's very fine-tuned drainage enhancements to the marsh surface. So what we're seeing in Rhode Island marshes, and this is more pronounced in southern New England than anywhere else on the East Coast, is that because sea levels are rising faster than the marshes accrete sediment and build elevation, we're seeing vegetation starting to die off, which creates these dead areas that fill with water. The water is shallow, it's very saline, it's not hospitable to fish. The temperatures get very high. So it creates this kind of negative feedback loop where the marsh starts to subside in these areas because there's no vegetation to create biomass underneath the marsh surface. So runnels are these very shallow, usually less than 12 inches wide and 12 inches deep, kind of either trapezoidal or triangular in cross section. They're not ditches, they're more like small little creeks that are dug often by hand, but sometimes by low ground pressure equipment. The goal of them is just to get the surface water off the marsh. They're not there to drain the substrate of the marsh or drain the peat. It's just to remove that surface water long enough so that the vegetation can regenerate. And they're not a long-term solution, but they have been successful at helping to, you know, stop that negative feedback loop of marsh
Sounds like a
subsidence.
very old English term.
Yeah, I mean, marshes, it's very interesting. Marshes have been manipulated by farmers for years, and this is kind of along that scale of intervention.
Yeah, I noticed that with Fogland, you were looking at structures used for hay generation and stuff from the 1700s. So we're talking about removing those because of the climate change or leaving them alone?
No, I would say this work is really interesting. I won't get into too much detail, but these are kind of legacy structures. They're berms, they're dams that you don't even know they're there because the marsh has grown over them and the system has kind of adapted to them being there, but they do impact the hydrology of the marsh. So the work here is more working around those to make sure that we don't get that subsidence. But no, they're so well established. It would seem that
you might anger a different group if we started pulling some of those things down. Right. My last question, and again, I'm curious on a lot of this stuff, but there was with Fogland, it was ranked in the upper 25% of salt marshes, but what's that mean? Is that good or is that bad? Or
Yeah, I would have to confirm what that means, but I believe what they're talking about is we did a statewide assessment of marsh condition.
Right.
And so I believe Fogland is, when they say upper 25%, I believe that is from our vulnerability assessment. So it means it's among the more vulnerable marshes. And
Okay.
that's, we kind of use this standardized method to look at things like elevation and vegetation
Yeah.
growth patterns and stuff. So
I would find that a little hard to believe, but it confused me. I'll do a little research and see if I can figure it out a little better.
I'll
Thank you
take
for
a
your
look. Yeah,
patience.
thank you.
So, well explained. Thank you.
No, I appreciate the questions. Thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. McGovern?
Hi, Caitlin. Just can you just give me a sense on timing, assuming the funding is approved for these projects?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. So typically, if the council issues an approval tonight, we will get word out to applicants as soon as possible. And typically, CRMC turns those payment requests. These go out as upfront payments to awardees. And so usually that happens in March or by early April. But our kind of drop dead point is the end of the fiscal year. At the end of June. So they will go out within
Okay,
the
great.
next couple months. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Caitlin or Ms. Feldman? All right, thank you both for your hard work on this. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, so we have before us the recommendations as presented from the Technical Advisory Committee. They are contained within our agenda in their entirety as part of the package. So without any questions coming forth, I think we're in a posture to accept a motion as it relates to the proposed recommendations. Is there a motion?
We'll
Mr. Gomez?
move approval of the recommendations, full support for them, and job well done.
The motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second,
And Ms. Reynolds has seconded the motion by Mr. Gomez. I'll now poll the council. Ms. McGovern,
Approved.
Ms. Montanaro,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
aye.
Mr. Gagnon,
Aye.
Mr. Gomez,
Aye.
and I too, Raymond Coy, vote aye on the motion to approve. Again, thank you both ladies for your hard work and that of the committee.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next matter. Where are we? Next matter on the agenda is a public hearing on program changes. The issue is to repeal of the current CRMC rules and regulations governing the protection and management of freshwater wetlands in the vicinity of the coast at 650-RICR-20-00-2 to be effective on July 1, 2022, which is the same date that the newly adopted CRMC freshwater wetland rules at 650-RICR-20-00-9 will be effective. Tony, do I need to open up a public hearing on this? Mr. Boyd?
No, I'm going to tell you why, because it's a revocation of the existing regulations.
Okay, and
And I'm sorry, it's a regulation, it's a revocation of the old regulations. It's a formality as opposed to a public hearing.
all right. Was that you? I know you had your hand raised, Jim. You want to address it or?
All I wanted to do, Mr. Chairman and council members, is just give you a very brief context of what we're doing tonight. As you know, 8 weeks ago, the council adopted a new set of CRMC freshwater wetland regulations that will become effective on July 1st of this year, the same day that the DEM new freshwater wetland regulations will also be effective, and that the CRMC staff and the DEM staff worked very closely together over several years to develop these comprehensive set of regulations. In the meantime, we have our current existing regulations, which are part 2 of what you just mentioned, And our intent, after issuing a public notice on February the 21st, the public comment period will expire on March 24th. And then we are asking that the council would then repeal the current freshwater wetland regs, Part 2, to be effective on July 1, when the new regulations under Part 9 are effective. And I will leave all the legal formalities to our legal counsel, Mr. DeSisto.
And Tony, no action by us until after the period closes on March 24, correct?
Correct.
All right. Jeff, anything to add relative to what Jim brought forward?
No, Mr. Chair.
All right, so is there anything else we need to do this evening on this particular one, Tony?
No.
All right. But while it's on the agenda, any questions from council members to either Mr. Boyd or Mr. Willis as it relates to this issue? All right, see none. It looks like that concludes the formal part of the agenda, and the next item is a request for an executive session. Am I correct on that, Tony?
That's correct, yes.
So are we accepting a motion to go into executive session? Then we'll come out and then close this?
That's
Is that-
correct, yes.
All right. So I would entertain a motion to go into executive session. So I want to make that motion.
This is Gagnon. I move that we move to executive session.
Mr. Gagnon has made that motion. Is there a second?
But before a second, the clarification is this is under 42-46-5 subsection A 2 for personnel matters.
Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't read.
And the employee has been notified.
Yes. All right, with that said, Mr. Gagnon has made the motion. Is there a second?
McGovern, second.
All right, Ms. McGovern has seconded it. I'll now poll the council. Ms. McGovern,
Aye.
Ms. Montanaro,
Aye.
Ms. Reynolds,
Aye.
Mr. Gagnon,
Aye.
Mr. Gomez.
Aye.
I too, Raymond Coyer, vote aye. So we will now be in executive session. Is this one of those we go into another room or?
Actually, Mr. Chair, what Ryan will do is put everybody but myself, legal counsel, and you all, and Lisa to take minutes into the waiting room. The rest of us will just stay right here.
I'm sorry, say that again. We're staying here?
Yes,
Everyone
we are
else is going
staying
to the
here,
waiting
and
room?
Ryan, our moderator, is moving everybody.
Everyone else to the waiting room. Gotcha. Okay. I think we're good, right?
Not yet.
All right.
Want this on the record?
No.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Cindy's got to move out too.
Okay, sorry, Sid.
Is,
Executive session,
We're going to start bringing folks back in.
okay.
That should be it.
All right, so we're back in our regular session. At this time, I'd entertain a motion to seal the minutes of the matters discussed in executive session. Anyone want to make that motion?
I'll move that we seal the minutes. Gagnon.
Has made that motion. Is there a second?
Reynolds seconds.
Reynolds seconds it. I'll now poll the council. Ms. McGovern,
Aye.
Ms. Montanaro,
Aye.
Ms. Reynolds,
Aye.
Mr. Gagnon,
Aye.
Mr. Gomez.
Aye.
I too, Raymond Coyer, vote aye. At this time, I'd entertain a motion to direct or legal counsel to act on the matters that were discussed in executive session as discussed. Someone want to make that motion?
So moved.
Mr. Gomez has made the motion. Is there a second?
Second, McGovern.
Ms. McGovern has seconded it. I'll now poll the council. Ms. McGovern,
Aye.
Ms. Montanaro,
Aye.
Ms. Reynolds,
Aye.
Mr. Gagnon,
Aye.
Mr. Gomez.
Aye.
I too, Raymond Coyer, vote aye as it relates to that particular motion. And I don't think there's anything else to come before us on the full council. Am I correct? Jeff, Tony,
That's correct.
Jim?
That is correct.
That's correct, yes.
All right, then at this time, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Someone want to make the motion?
So
Make a
moved.
motion.
Motion made and seconded. I will call for a collective vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Let the record reflect there was a unanimous vote. All right, thank you, everyone. Be safe.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Good
Thank
night.
you. Take
Bye.
care.